and I am lecturer in modern history at Staffordshire University in the United Kingdom. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Edward Lemon and Dr. Erica Marat, members of the Oxus Society for Central Asian Affairs, and I'm talking to them in my position as co-editor of the Peripheral Histories website. I'll talk a little bit about that before moving on to introduce my interviewees more specifically. So the Peripheral Histories website is a digital humanities project, as we say in the biz, which is designed to bring attention to new and forthcoming research on regions of Eurasia which have traditionally, or in the modern period at least, been considered peripheral. And that typically centres on regions such as Central Asia, which obviously we're going to talk about more today, but also the Caucasus, but also the Baltic states, Eastern Europe and Siberia. And also we tend to focus on peripheries defined conceptually and socially as well. So communities of people or identities which have perhaps in the past been pushed to the periphery of their societies, or decentered or dislocated in some way. We tend to draw scholarship from both early career researchers and also more established scholars, and we've run a series of webinar events this year as well, partly due to the conditions of the pandemic, but also to again showcase that work to a wider audience. So do please take a look, if you haven't already, at the peripheralhistories.co.uk website to see all that fantastic scholarship which is continuing to go on across the world. As I say, I'm not here to talk about peripheral histories today, but about the Oxus Society. So I'll just introduce my interviewees and then we'll get started with a few questions. Dr. Edward Lemon is president of the Oxus Society and a research assistant professor at the Bush School of Government and Public Services at Texas A&M University. And he is also editor of the book Critical Approaches to Security in Central Asia. And Dr. Erica Marat is a member of the board of directors for the Oxus Society and an associate professor and chair of the Regional and Analytical Studies Department at the College of International Security Affairs at the National Defence University. She has authored several books, including most recently The Politics of Police Reform, Society Against the State in Post-Soviet Countries. And I'm really pleased that you've found some time to join me today, so thank you very much. The first question is very broad and it's simply an invitation for you, please, to tell us about the origins of the Oxus Society and its overarching aims.
So thank you for speaking with us today. The Oxus Society is a relatively new organisation. We established the organisation as a non-profit organisation in April and launched in September 2020. So we're relatively new as we're speaking in December 2020. We're a non-profit research-focused organisation that aims to be a knowledge hub for research, for debate and dialogue on Central Asia. Our definition of Central Asia, because of course many people come at Central Asia from different perspectives with different definitions, but for the purposes of our organization, we're particularly focusing on the 5 Central Asian, post-Soviet Central Asian republics, former Soviet Central Asian republics of obviously Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, plus Xinjiang, the Uyghur autonomous region of China. And the goals of our organization, as I said, is to become a knowledge hub, to reflect the diversity in the field. And I think diversity works on multiple levels. I think we're interested in forming a voice for scholars and experts from the region itself, from Central Asia, who have often been not had their voice heard, particularly for an international audience. We're interested in diversity, of course, across gender and across different research themes. So sort of our interest is not purely in current affairs, in military and political and security affairs. We're also interested in history and anthropology and having multiple diverse perspectives on key issues coming into the region, involving the region. And I think diversity as well, diversity of perspectives. We're interested in sparking debates and sort of discussions around key issues. You know, for example, does the secular state provide security, or does it provide, a system of intolerance? Is China's rise in the region in the interests of Central Asians? Which Central Asians? What benefits does it have? What negatives and costs does it have? So we really want to spark some more debate and dialogue around these issues. And then I think lastly, our goal is to present data, qualitative data, but also quantitative data. And so we've been building a number of data sets on topics ranging from protests to, as we'll release next week, migration and arms transfers to the region. So, providing data in a visually appealing way that's sort of digestible and understandable for a broad audience.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Was the decision to include, you mentioned the 5 Central Asian states as they're typically known in the Xinjiang region of China, was that the instinctive choice in terms of regional inclusion, or did you consider a broader or more diverse definition?
Yeah, I think obviously it's very difficult to sort of approach the region, and everyone comes with their own perspectives on what Central Asia is. Are we talking Inner Asia? Are we talking Central Eurasia? Are we talking the Central Eurasian Studies Society's definition that includes obviously Afghanistan, Mongolia, parts of Russia such as Tatarstan? And I mean, for our purposes, it was partly a pragmatic choice based on the expertise within our own networks of those who were setting up the organization. And I think the inclusion of Xinjiang was both because of the historic ties between the Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik populations in that region, what is formerly known as East Turkestan, and those historical linkages and contemporary linkages between different populations, particularly with what's going on in Xinjiang now, and also sort of wanting to really orientate the sort of the focus of the region. Sort of obviously, we're interested in Central Asia in and of itself, but we're particularly interested in its linkages to the south and to the east towards Japan and China. And so the inclusion of Xinjiang, allows us to sort of approach the region in some ways from that Asian perspective, as opposed to from the perspective of what is traditionally sort of the region being traditionally classified as being part of sort of post-Soviet space. So we're particularly interested in sort of approaching it from that perspective.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned the kind of pre-existing bodies of expertise that you had in the networks you were working with, and leads me on to my next question, which is about the challenges you faced when you were establishing a society, both in terms of its kind of geographical location in the USA, but also in terms of the interactions and the connections you've sought, I assume, to build with the Central Asian region itself. What obstacles were there?
Well, I think, it's been an interesting experience building the organization during the pandemic. I think that's, prevented us from being able to make some of the trips and to engage with individuals face to face, which would have been optimal. But of course, during the pandemic, we've been able to have events and discussions with various people, that have been facilitated via Zoom. So I think that's been useful. I think, of course, there's a perennial challenge of including all the countries in an equal way. And of course, Turkmenistan is always a difficult country to cover. And of course, including Turkmenistan, including Turkmenistani scholars, as well as scholars from working on certain topics from other parts of the region, such as Tajikistan, is always difficult because of the pressures that those academics are under to publish on certain topics, and obviously not to be critical of the government. So that's been a challenge. And we have, as part of our website, this researcher directory that anyone can join. But of course, certain scholars from the region, experts, have been concerned about being associated with an organization that, whilst is not partisan, of course, has certain critical content on its website, runs critical articles. And so we give people the option to be included in the network, but in a sort of non-public facing. They don't need to be part of the public directory, but they can be part of our sort of network and attend our events and other things like that. So, I think it is, of course, inclusion of all different voices is difficult. Of course, another thing that we need to do better going forward, and this is merely a matter of capacity at this point, because we're a small organization, with relying on a number of people volunteering their time, because we don't have core funding at this stage. We obviously in the future want to include more local language scholarship, which I think is very important to sort of bringing in more diverse voices, and sort of, as the region moves, as I think Erica will address, moves away from its colonial past, and as the region desovietizes and decolonizes, there's a real need to continue to promote scholarship in local languages, and that's something we're definitely interested in carrying on doing going forward. But it's maybe at this point a matter of capacity. But yeah, I think it's been definitely an interesting and learning experience to build an organization from the ground up. But our approach is very much collaborative. We're interested in any of our projects. If people have feedback, if people have things to add, then we welcome sort of criticism, and we welcome dialogue with people.
It sounds like what's helped is creating a kind of a spectrum of participation and collaboration, right? That people can become more or less involved depending on their preferences and their domestic or professional circumstances as well. And you mentioned local language engagement as well, and I imagine at present the predominant operating languages for the society are going to be English and Russian. Is that accurate, or are you seeing more and more participation in Central Asian languages too?
I mean, I think we've tried to put out, I co-authored an article on the Tajik elections with the Tajik author, for example, we put the article out in English, and then in Tajik we've had book reviews in Uzbek and Kazakh of books focusing on that region, such as Sarah Cameron's The Hungry Steppe. We did a review of that in Kazakh, and Otkun Kunlar, the book by Qadiri that was recently translated into English. We had a review of that by an Uzbek academic written in Uzbek. So I mean, we're trying where possible to put out content where the authors can write in both languages. But obviously, in an ideal world in the future, it'd be great if all of our content was being put out in multiple regional languages. And that's something we're definitely hoping to move towards.
Great. I've got a question now that I think draws on a lot of what you've said already, more specifically about something that the Society has recently launched, which is this Scholars of Central Asia book database. I'm wondering how that database came about primarily, and perhaps again what its role is or what its aims are.
So I think I'll answer this question. The book came, the database came out from a place of frustration, but I think it turned out to be into this really important and groundbreaking resource for all scholars, both in the West and in Central Asia, because it allows to see in one place what is the scholarship out there published by Central Asians and in Central Asia or in Western countries, and how can this research be better incorporated in or mainstreamed in the research of Central Asia, both also by Western scholars and by Central Asian scholars. And it is really an important turning point, I think, in how we connect different scholarly communities, because for a very long time, Western scholarly community, mostly US and European scholars, and then also Central Asian scholars, they coexisted in different silos, and there was really not much interaction between them. And then the organization named Central Eurasian Society Studies came about, and it tried to create this shared platform. In the last couple of years, so since mid-2000s, there has been a huge evolution of this organization. In the last couple of years, it really was a wonderful set of events that included wide variety of scholars specializing on really interesting topics, not just those mainstream topics of political science or IR, but also lots of scholars from the anthropology discipline or sociology and so on. So, but despite this diversity and inclusion, we know that for again and again, for 12 years since the organization, since society established book award category, only books published by Western scholars and predominantly by American scholars have been awarded. But it really didn't mean that there was no scholarship originating from Central Eurasia. There has been a lot, and the database shows exactly that. The tens and tens of books, over 100 books that were published by scholars from Central Eurasia. So behind the facade of inclusion, there seems to be still a divide, and beyond CES, I think it's important to see how scholars reference each other, whose ideas they follow. And if we create better connections between different scholarly communities, I think we will be changing, we will be diversifying how we frame processes in Central Asia. We are expanding this, we're expanding the space in which we are able to operate with new ideas, new perspectives, new positionalities by scholars from different backgrounds and publishing also in different languages. So this database is really important, and I think it is already creating the sense of, oh, what are the voices that have been left out, and how can we better include a whole range of perspectives in published works.
Yeah, thank you. As a historian of Central Asia myself, so much of the content of that database was new to me, and I think it just demonstrates how important it is to make sure that everyone has a look through it and to find out just how much is out there. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And that.
If I can just add quickly, sorry. We're also in keeping with our sort of collaborative approach. We are aware that the database is in no way complete. We worked on it for a few months. We worked on it through, doing various searches and using our own sort of, working within our own disciplines within our team. But we're sure that there's all sorts of content that's missing. And we've already had, I think, since launching it earlier this week, we've had, at least I think 15 submissions that fit within our criteria, which is sort of non-fiction books published within the sort of humanities and social sciences since 1991 by an author from the region. We've already had 15 submissions that fit within that definition within the past week. We're sure that at present there are something like 120 entries. We're hoping eventually this will run into the hundreds. There must be 500, 600, probably even into the thousands. So we're going to continually update this and build this as new scholarship comes out, on the one hand, and as we continue to discover other books. So just noting that.
Thank you. I'm sorry if you can hear that. That's my dog, who's also very excited about the Central Asian Scholars database too. And that brings me on to the larger structural context of scholarship on Central Asia that you're talking about there. I'm wondering, and this must be something you've given an awful lot of thought to since before the society was launched, but in fact when you were planning it too, and it's something I think about a lot. What is the role of scholarship in, if we call it the West, or at least outside of Central Asia, in developing new knowledge about the region and facilitating public understanding of the region? And has that role and the proper role for organisations like yourselves changed in the past, let's say, 20 years? And a subsequent question to that is whether or not some of that is specific to Central Asia itself, or whether there's a broader shift that Central Asia is kind of part of, about the way that scholarship in the West might review non-Western regions, their history, their contemporary political affairs, and so on.
So the role of Central Asian scholars, just like for any field, including scholars that are from the field, is crucial because, again, of their positionality, because how they connect to the field, how the importance, the significance they attach to their research, that it's not just necessarily for their career growth, but for bettering their societies, their communities, raising awareness of the problems that and the human condition that surrounds them through research, and topics and approaches to understanding Central Asia, of course, differs between, just like for any area studies, between scholars who come from outside and scholars who are from that part of the world. And I think by including more scholars from Central Asia into our discussions, into dialogues, referencing of scholarly works, we're really moving away from this tired notion that Central Asia is an obscure place that is marginal or unimportant for world affairs. Even in the West, scholars who criticize this notion, I rarely see their acknowledgement that the region and the area is not obscure to people who live there. It's very well understood, and they're very aware of where they are, what the place represents, and it's important for the people who live there. So reframing this understanding of Central Asia with the help of scholars who are from the region is significant, and it is going to decolonialize the region, not necessarily from the Russian Soviet framing of the region, but now more of a Western-led framing of the region that is somehow this region used to be important after 9/11, now it's not, but let's see what's going on there anyways. But I mean, it's a fascinating field. There are many processes happening. The life is diverse and rich and dynamic. So all that is depicted through various publications and discussions by scholars in the field.
Yes, thank you. As someone, again, who obviously delivers teaching on Central Asia myself, often the first question you have to answer is, or the implicit question that's being asked by the audience is, why should we care about this region? And I really hope that we're moving past that now, and able to take for granted its importance. And I think that's excellent, maybe in some of the changes that are taking place in the way that the public perhaps understand or talk about Central Asia, or rather how it is spoken about and understood it in public discourse. Do you detect any changes in the kind of place of Central Asia in public discussion, perhaps in the English language, or in the English-speaking parts of the world, again, over the course of your careers to date?
Ed, do you want to take this, or should I go?
I can go first if you want. I think, unfortunately, I think the same tropes keep on coming time and time again, at least in the media, at least in the mainstream media. I think there are certainly there's a body of individuals who many of us who are on Twitter interact with, who have a deep understanding of the region, even if they don't come from the region. I think those individuals are attuned to the fact that many of these tropes, the New Great Games, Silk Roads, the region being, as Erica said, sort of obscure and dangerous, and sort of a source of amusement in the case particularly of Turkmenistan and its president. I think there's an awareness amongst a certain small subset of people, and but I think for the vast majority there's still these perceptions, they continue, and each time there's a major event in the region, be that a revolution or overthrow of a government, as there was recently in Kyrgyzstan, or a terrorist attack, as there was in Tajikistan, that's sort of when the mainstream media sort of takes notice. And unfortunately, maybe because of the structure of the media, and their correspondents are coming usually from Moscow, occasionally nowadays from Beijing or Kiev, and they're not really embedded in the region, that they continue to sort of portray the region in a certain way that is maybe counterproductive. And I guess I was disappointed in many ways to see that the latest Borat movie was released. Maybe Eric wants to address this in greater detail, but obviously that was something that was first created 20 years ago, and so that's maybe a sign that the discourse unfortunately hasn't moved on as much as many of us would have liked it to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that so it is important to move away from, and I completely agree with Ed. I mean, there's so many excellent scholars from United States, from Europe, who are producing incredible scholarship. I think it's important to move away, and especially in communicating with our students, from this frame of studying any area, be that Central Asia, Africa, or even part of the EU, if you're based in the EU, or part of the United States, from the understanding of, what is there for me if I study this region? How will it better my career? Will I be able to fit in the, defense complex of the United States and use my knowledge to advance my career because this region presents somehow the security interest for my country? Move away from this frame to really studying an area for the sake of understanding, formulating a deep understanding of a community, and appreciating how much it takes to understand a place, develop skills in approaching a foreign context by not positioning yourself in the center of it, but trying to immerse yourself into this unknown and appreciate again, how much it takes to connect with a foreign context and use those skills maybe in other, in other undertakings, not necessarily in academic life, but and being part of your own community, of being a good citizen, wherever you're based. And I hope that when we teach Central Asia especially, we move away from framings like, oh, Central Asia sandwiched between Russia and China, or trying to frame developments in, let's say, Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan from the perspective of but what does it mean for Russia? What does it mean for China or United States? And really focusing on what does it mean? What are the implications of processes that we see in those countries to the societies of that place, of that area? How can we understand, again, the human condition given all the security and political developments in that part of the world?
I think for me, what comes few of the answers you've given is it's a broader problem. Often perhaps scholarship is less and less able or less and less self-confident in its ability to communicate its public good and its public worth, and that applies to Central Asian studies, I think, as elsewhere. I think people tend to be a little bit nervous about making a declaration of self-confidence about what knowledge and understanding, especially area studies knowledge and understanding, can do. For I'm sure multiple reasons that I couldn't possibly enumerate, but I also think that perhaps sometimes there is a tendency for area studies scholars to sort of stand in the public square with their arms folded, rolling their eyes, not necessarily always willing to engage and share knowledge in an open way, which would invite people to understand things better. But that, again, that's not necessarily a problem specific to Central Asian studies either. Yeah. I have a final question. Thank you so much for everything you've shared with us so far. This one's slightly corny, so I wrote it down and I'm going to read it out. Imagine we have an enthusiastic final year undergraduate student listening to this interview. They want to pursue Central Asian studies. What are the most exciting current avenues of research in this area? A good question if corny.
I guess I can go first, then Eric can chip in. I think there are so many interesting things going on in the region, and that was partly why we wanted to set up Oxus Society, to reflect the sort of dynamism and the changes that are going on in the region. I mean, I think both of us, Erica and I, sort of work more within the sort of international relations, political science worlds, so perhaps could speak less to the sort of very interesting and emergent themes in some other disciplines. But I know, and Alun, you would know more about this than I would. But there's certainly there's a lot of interesting history being written about the region, from using multiple languages, using local language memoirs from the Soviet Union, for example, that is really enumerating a sort of bottom-up sort of history of various different aspects of, of the history of the region, from the local perspective, which I think is very important. That's something I've read about, but in no way is something I'm an expert on. And I think that sort of leads to sort of an interest that I developed, and was a focus of the edited volume that you mentioned in the introduction, which is sort of, again, bottom-up perspectives on security, right? We often think of security in the region as being, related to terrorist attacks or border conflicts or spillovers from Afghanistan. But for most everyday people, right, the security, safety, means not being groped if you're a woman walking down the street wearing a certain, certain dressing in a certain way, being, falling victim to, ethnic or racial slurs if you're part of an ethnic minority in different parts of Kyrgyzstan, for example. So, I think, moving away from this sort of top-down national security focus to a focus on the everyday security is certainly something that's been interesting. I think, another sort of recognition that moves us away from Central Asia being sort of peripheral is, looking at sort of transnational aspects of Central Asia's authoritarianism and governance and economies, which is something obviously that's been looked at by various people in terms of kleptocracy. And we obviously saw in the past few days, Matremov, the former customs official from Kyrgyzstan, being put on the US sanctions list. So sort of looking at Central Asia instead of being peripheral, as being enmeshed in these sort of global networks of capital flow and sort of exchange. So I think that's another interesting and important area. And then I think another area, of course, which again is sort of in many ways sort of, I guess, an external perspective, but the continued, obviously, rise of China and diverse ways in which it's attempting to influence Central Asian societies, politics, and economies, things like influencing governance, influencing the judiciary, legal systems. There's some continued interesting work to be done. And also from the local perspective, how is this being perceived? How are Central Asians sort of adopting strategies of resistance is another interesting theme that we've started to dig into.
Thank you.
I completely agree. I mean, Ed did a great job outlining everything that's on my mind as well, that there is such an array of topics to research, from international relations to really bottom-up processes. I would also add, let me just show this picture. You can see that, right? A picture I took from Osh, and just this picture, a really quick snap of just everyday life in the region. So Osh is in the Fergana Valley, shows really the mix of the traditional and contemporary, the Western influences, influences from the Islamic world, the gender dynamics, the how young people feel in and how they orient themselves in the public space. So this is in downtown Osh, how they spend their the leisure time, and there's so much to discover in the region, from everyday practices. For instance, one of my favorite articles, and I'm sorry I forgot the name of the author, is the newly emerged coffee drinking culture in Bishkek. It's a fascinating research of just everyday life in Bishkek. But there's so much to uncover, so much to discover, and one of the aspects of Central Asian area studies is there are topics that are deeply investigated at this point. For instance, variations in authoritarianism, or the revival of Islam, or different strains of Islam, and Ed as part of that research community as well. And at the same time, there are topics that have been hardly touched, and there is so much space to experiment and find new knowledge and come up with interesting ideas and interesting conclusions.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree, and I share that sense of opportunity and just this huge vista of different subjects that are waiting there to be investigated. Again, as a historian supervising undergraduate or postgraduate dissertations, that sense of, you could do Stalin again if you want to, right? Or you could get involved in a relatively new or a newly expanding area of scholarship, right, and do something really interesting and innovative. And I have that conversation all the time. Okay. I can't thank you both enough for the time you've spent today talking to me about the Oxus Society. I do hope everybody goes away, if they haven't already investigated the website, to go away and do that and find out more about what you're doing. But I'm hoping that was a relatively good, brief introduction to the work you're doing and what future directions you might take. Okay, so thank you once again, and I'll close off now.
Thank you
so much.